Welcome back to Coordinating Clinical Trials. My name is Steve Pope, and this module, this learning unit, we're going to be focusing on principal investigator oversight. So let's talk about what the purpose of that is. As you know, the principal investigator, or the PI, is responsible for all activities that take place at the site conducting their trial. So this could include comprehensive set of responsibilities to ensure that the study is ethically, safely done and within regulatory compliance. So you're going to play a key role in this because you're going to be doing a lot of the work, whereas the principal investigator has overall responsibility. A lot of the day-to-day work they're simply not going to be that involved in. It's mainly going to be your role. And so think of it as, you're an extension of that PI in your role as the coordinator, and you're there to work on their behalf. So let's take a look at our learning objectives. First of all, we're going to discuss the PI responsibilities during a clinical trial. We'll cite the different examples of research misconduct, define the characteristics of good PI oversight, practice the ability to identify unethical research tasks, and identify elements of poor oversight and scientific misconduct. So let's talk about principal investigator oversight and what the elements of that are. They really fall in a couple of categories. First of all, you've got protocol adherence. Is the study being done according to the written protocol and according to the procedures and events that are in the protocol that are approved by your IRB? You've got regulatory compliance. Is the study meeting all regulatory requirements for FDA, or in this case ICH E6 R2? You've got informed consent. Informed consent means is every subject has the opportunity to be informed about the study before they consent to participate. So that's a big area. Safety and welfare of patients. Even though the patient may have another primary care physician, the physician conducting the trial still has responsibility for the care of that patient while they're in the trial. Data integrity. We want to make sure that all the data we collect is accurate and we're collecting it according to ICH guidelines, so that then it can be attributable, and we can then use that data in our regulatory environment, our regulatory submission. Then finally, study documentation is your investigator site file, which you've been working on in previous lessons. Is that up to date? Is that according to the standard? So all of these things are some of the elements of principal investigator oversight. Also related to principal investigator oversight are training and delegation. That's why you do the delegation log, communication with the sponsor, budget and resources. This is an area that you're going to play a key role in. Quality control. And then finally, study closeout, because there are IRB requirements and there are post-study requirements from the FDA that your PI is going to need to be aware of and need to adhere to. So protocol adherence. So the first element here is to ensure that the clinical trial is conducted according to an IRB approved protocol. So you're going to be involved in this process because, as you've learned in this course, you're going to be making submissions to your IRB for them to approve not only the entire protocol, but also elements of it that you're going to be conducting when your subjects come back for the subject visits. Also ensure that any protocol amendments are properly implemented. You will get protocol amendments. They are very common. Hopefully you will only have maybe a few, with the trial that you're working on, but they're treated the same as the initial protocol. They have to be approved by the IRB. They more than likely are going to require an update to the informed consent documents, which means that as your subjects come back in, you have to reconsent them with the new protocol amendment 1, 2, or 3, whatever number it is, with the new ICF. So that's part of what that means by implementing it appropriately. So you're going to follow all applicatory regulatory requirements for various regulatory authorities around the world. The one you're going to be dealing with mostly is going to be FDA, and those are in the ICH E6 R2 document that we've been using in our course. So there's a section in there for principal investigator responsibilities, and that's what we're going over in this lesson this week. You're also going to ensure that all required approvals, such as IRB approvals, are obtained and maintained. In some cases, you may be working at a site where they have some sort of biomedical monitoring committee that's in addition to their IRB, and you probably have to get their approval first before it gets submitted to the full IRB for approval by them. You also may be working at a site where there's a local IRB, but then you're also using a central IRB because the local IRB farms out some of that work to a central IRB. And so in some cases, you may have to get approval for both IRBs before you can get started on an amendment. We'll go over these in a little more detail. Informed consent. So the PI has ultimate responsibility to ensure that informed consent is obtained for all study subjects before any study procedures are performed. If you go back and pull up some of the FDA warning letters that have been filed, and these are a public record, you'll find that a lot of the findings are related to inadequate informed consent procedures. You want to make sure that you adequately document the informed consent process. And what that means is that you describe what happened when the subject came in to be consented. They were given the consent form. They were given time to answer any questions. Either the PI or a delegate was available to answer all of their questions before they consented to participate in the trial. And you'll document that this was done before any trial procedures were completed. The PI is also going to ensure that study subjects understand the nature and study, risks, and potential benefits. Now, these are going to be spelled out in the ICF, but the PI needs to be available, needs to be able to share with them what the nature of the study is, risks and potential benefits, because the subjects are probably going to have questions about that. And so that's something that needs to be answered before they can properly consent to the trial. Safety and welfare of patients. The PI is going to monitor the study subject health and safety throughout the study. So not only are you collecting medical data when they come in for their visits, but that medical data needs to be assessed by the PI so that they notice any change in the patient's baseline. Is their health deteriorating, for example? We don't want that. So we want them to be aware of changes to the patient's health baseline. Also, the reporting of all adverse events, serious adverse events, and adverse events of special interest to the sponsor and, if necessary, to the IRB. So, we're going to be going over safety a little bit later. However, you're going to collect adverse events from the subjects when they come in. So the way you do that, more than likely, you're going to probably be the first person to have contact with them. So as they come in, you're going to ask them questions like, has there been any change in your health since you were here last? Have you been sick, or have you experienced any other changes in your health baseline? You don't just say, well, hey, you had any adverse events, because the subject doesn't know what that means. So any change to their baseline from a headache to a heart attack is considered an adverse event. And then serious adverse events are just as they say, that's got to be life-threatening, involving hospitalization or a prolonged hospitalization. And there's other criteria that it meets based on your study. Serious adverse events need to be reported to the sponsor within 24 hours of your becoming aware of it. What that means is that you need to alert them, hey, subject 001 was just hospitalized. We don't know any more details right now, but we think there's going to be a serious adverse event related to that. So that would be adequate notification. You may not have all the information, but you just got to make them aware of it. And then as you collect more information, you share that with the sponsor as well. So this is something that is part of the PI oversight. Depending on what IRB you're working with, they may require that you submit to them all SAE data. Some SAEs may not fit the reporting requirements of the IRB, which is fine, but you probably should make a rule of thumb of submitting it and at least getting their acknowledgement that it doesn't meet their reporting requirements. So data integrity, this is going to be an area that you're going to play a key role in. You're going to ensure that accuracy, completeness, and reliability of all study data collected for your study subjects. And the PI's responsibility is to oversee the data collection, data entry, and data storage process at their site. So as I said, this is going to be one of your main roles, even though the PI is going to ultimately sign off on the case report form, ECRFs, that you enter into the EDC system. They're ultimately responsible for that data, but they seldom review that CRF data. So they rely very heavily on you to accurately input that data. When your monitors come out and monitor your site, they're going to be looking through that data too, and they're going to ensure that it's properly in there. You're also going to have data management people from the sponsor that are going to issue queries in the EDC system to have you, either clarify or provide further explanation for certain data elements. Study documentation. The PI has oversight over this. So you're going to be the one maintaining all essential documents such as study logs, consent forms, correspondence, IRB documents, etc. Throughout the trial. So we've gone over these in great detail in some of our earlier lessons. You're going to ensure that the documentation is kept up to date, that you store it properly, and it's made available to site monitors and auditors upon their request. So that is one thing that is part of the 1572 that your PI signs, which is a contract between them and the FDA. One of the items in there is that they will make all documentation available for monitoring by the sponsor and for any audits that may occur. Training and delegation. So it is the PI's responsibility to train all staff on study procedures prior to their start on the trial. It's also their responsibility to document the training of that staff. You may do that in a number of different ways. You may keep some sort of training system at your site where those training records can be made available for monitors or auditors to prove that site staff had adequate training. You may want to keep some type of paper log indicating when each staff member was trained on the protocol, for instance, or was trained on certain procedures of the protocol. The PI needs to document that occurred and be sure that was done correctly. You've got to delegate, the PI's got to delegate tasks to appropriate team members. That's something that is part of their oversight and is specifically mentioned in the ICH guidelines. And then they have to document the delegation of tasks to staff members and keep that delegation log current. That's why we go through that exercise of creating a delegation log and keeping it updated as you've got new members, new staff members come on board, and then you've got others that they may not leave the site necessarily, but they're no longer assigned to that study. So there'd be an end date for those folks. So communication with the sponsor. PIs are required to maintain communication. That's primarily going to be email, more than likely, but there could be formal letters that go out. So sponsors are going to communicate probably mostly with you. However, there probably are going to be situations where they communicate directly to the PI if they've got a question, specific question, a medical question about a subject. They may reach out directly to the PI for information on that. As there are safety letters or SUSARs that come out during the course of the trial, those will be sent directly to the PI. Now, they may use some portal product for the PI to log into and acknowledge that they've received those and they've reviewed them. But there's going to be a review process, and that's something that they would typically reach out directly to the PI about. And the PI's got to provide regular updates on study progress and any issues that arise to the sponsor and the study team. That's probably something that's going to be fairly rare, but it is part of their responsibility. And so you need to be aware of that and maybe assist them some with that process. So budget and resources. The PI is going to prepare and manage a study budget, which is going to include staff working on the trial. We just had a lesson on that in one of our previous lessons. So you're probably going to be pretty involved in that process as well. And then they're also going to ensure that the trial is kept on track and within budget amounts. Now, one thing that you can do as the coordinator, and I see this a lot with working with sites, is that you need to keep up with the payments that you receive, that your site receives for work that you do on the trial. A lot of sites don't do a very good job of keeping up with this, and so what happens is that 6 months later, they discover that they weren't paid for a specific invoice or a specific set of procedures that they did, and then they're trying to get back with the sponsor, and there's a delay in that. So try and keep up with the payments as they come in. They're not going to go to you. They're probably going to go to some finance person, but you might make a habit of once a month kind of checking on that and make sure that there's not any outstanding invoices from or that were sent to the sponsor that need to be paid. Okay, quality control. The principal investigator is going to implement and follow good quality control measures that comply with GCP guidelines. In most cases, this is going to be via a series of standard operating procedures or SOPs. Your site should document every process and every procedure that you do. For example, the moment you receive study drug, that needs to be documented on what you do first, how that's checked in, how it's stored, how it's verified in the IWRS system, how it's checked for quality, how it's checked if there are any temperature excursions during transit, because sometimes that will occur, but you need to have a standard operating procedure on who does what for that particular process. And you're going to need to do that for each of the other processes that your site does. And then finally, the PI is going to need to be available for audits and regular monitoring visits. The monitoring visits, the PI may not be available face to face, but they can still be available via phone to talk with the monitor about any issues that come up during the visit, but they do need to make themselves available each time there's a monitoring visit. So study closeout. There's going to be a study closeout process that you're going to need to follow that will probably come from your IRB. You'll get a closeout visit, so the monitor is going to come out and they're going to collect any remaining documents that they haven't already collected. They're going to sign off on all logs. The PI is going to need to be available to sign the delegation log, for instance. That's something they're going to do at closeout visits. They're also going to need to understand what their post-trial responsibilities are going to be. These will be including if they need to let the sponsor know if the site moves to a new location, or if the PI retires, or there's a change in PI, that needs to be communicated. There's going to be a process for any submitting any articles to medical journals. You have to get the sponsor's approval to do that. You have to store all trial documentation for a certain period of time. If there's any long-term storage facility, you need to make that available so the sponsor knows where those documents are stored after a certain period of time. They have to still make themselves available for any audits, or whether they be FDA audits or sponsor audits. So there's a series of post-trial responsibilities that the PI needs to be aware of. And then finally, they're going to oversee the final analysis of data quality and the reporting of study results. So basically what that means is that they're going to sign off on all the CRF forms that you collected data on for the trial. So this next area is investigator misconduct. Now, I hope that none of you are ever in a situation where you've got to deal with potential investigator misconduct. However, you need to be aware of it and need to be aware of the FDA's constant surveillance of sites to try to weed out any potential investigator misconduct. So they routinely, the FDA that is, routinely investigates sites for compliance violations. These are found during their inspections, and they can lead to warning letters that get sent to sites. They can be sites or PIs can be disqualified from conducting research, and in some cases even criminal charges can occur that risk prison time for a PI depending on their level of their misconduct. So let's talk about what misconduct is. So basically, misconduct falls into one of three categories. It can be falsification of data, fabrication of data, and plagiarism. So let's go over each of these so that we can understand what they are. Okay, so the first one is falsification of data. So this occurs when investigators alter data to meet their own expectations. This might be something such as leaving out certain medical conditions that might make the subject unqualified for the trial. That could be an example of falsification of data. You might have falsification of lab results or things like that, or certain assessments that might be involved in the screening process that could determine a subject's eligibility to be in the trial. So these are probably examples, most common examples of falsification of data. The next area of misconduct is what we call fabrication of data. So what this is creating data that never occurred during the course of the study. This could include creating records of interviews, observation, or review of medical records that never took place, making up progress notes for patients who have not been visited, or reporting records on patients who had already died, or just making up patients on their own. That does occur from time to time. Most likely you are not going to be involved in that, but there are examples and there are cases of these types of fabrication of data occurring. And finally, plagiarism is an element of investigator misconduct, and we're all familiar with this. This is failure to attribute work of others. It involves the use of others' work, ideas, contributions, without properly citing the work as belonging to others. So this can sometimes be a little inadvertent and not necessarily intentional, so you have to be careful here. But I've seen cases where PIs might be required to submit to a sponsor their capability in a certain area, and they just go and copy something from some other document and put it in their CV, and you can tell the typeface is different, the point size is different. It's kind of obvious that the information has been copied. I mean, this would be an example of probably a plagiarism that probably was inadvertent, but it can arise from time to time. So to further amplify what I've gone over in this lesson, I've put out on Blackboard some reading assignments for you to take a look at. These are all medical journal or scholarly journal articles. They're not very long, but they discuss fraud in clinical trials, misconduct, investigator responsibilities, and what they're supposed to be involved in. So I think you'll find these to be really interesting. I'd like for you to take a look at these and be familiar with them. It's not something there's not going to be a test question on these reading assignments, but I do want you to take a look at them and further amplify what I've gone over in this lesson, and that'll help you understand investigator responsibilities a little bit better. And then finally, your discussion forum assignment. For this assignment, you're a clinical research coordinator at a research site working on a clinical trial for a new treatment of asthma. The sponsor of the study is a small biotech company who's working with a CRO to conduct the study. So basically, during a subject visit, while discussing the subject's recent medical history, the subject tells you that since the last visit, they have been experiencing migraine headaches requiring rest only. So you ask the PI if these should be considered adverse events. The PI says no, they're not related to the study drug. What should you do? So describe your answer in fewer than 200 words and post it in the discussion forum. So think about that. Think about how you would respond to the PI. This is something that has happened before. It's happened to me, so I know it can exist. So take a look at that. Post your discussion in the discussion forum, and I'll take a look at those and provide some feedback.